The first time I saw it, the alien child was huddled in a corner of a metallic chamber, its body twisted in ways that no record or manual had ever accounted for, a fragile creature that trembled not from cold, though the room was always cold, but from a terror that had been etched into its very cells by a society that had already condemned it before it had a chance to exist. Its skin, mottled and scarred, bore the marks of experiments designed to test endurance and obedience, yet it had been deemed a failure, a waste, a defective organism unworthy of even the basic considerations of life. Around the chamber, the echoes of marching feet of other children and adolescents reverberated against the steel walls, their small bodies pressed into the machinery of compliance, harnessed for labor, stripped of individuality, their voices hushed into near silence by the cold authority that oversaw the station. The air was dense with the smell of sterilization and machine oil, a sterile, indifferent stench that seemed to leach warmth from every living thing it touched, and I, a human among dozens of alien overseers and speculators, felt a weight in my chest that made the breath in my lungs feel heavy and sharp. They called it defective with a precision that was clinical, without hesitation, without any hint of compassion, and they gestured toward the auction platforms where corporations that thrived on the broken would come to claim it for profit, to dissect it, harvest parts of it, or train it into a servant that would generate credits for them before being discarded. I remember the first impulse I felt, the kind of instinct that is sometimes unique to humans, a stubborn, unreasoning need to protect, to assert that life in any form had value, even when the world had already decided it did not, and I stepped forward, risking the consequences of defying every protocol, every law, every cold alien expectation. When I claimed it, the eyes of the overseers and speculators burned into me, wide and calculating, but I could not retreat, could not allow it to be consumed by the machinery that valued nothing but efficiency and profit. From that moment, the weight of responsibility settled on me like a living thing, a companion as persistent as the tremor that ran through the child's body, and I learned almost immediately that saving it would not be a matter of speed or authority, but of patience, of relentless attention to the smallest gestures, the subtlest signals, the near imperceptible rhythms of fear and trust that pulsed through its fragile body. Feeding it was a trial in itself. It recoiled at the taste of nutrient gels, at the feel of utensils against its skin, flinched at any touch, lashed out instinctively when I tried to adjust its posture or prevent it from falling. Each day was punctuated by failures, missed meals, scratches that drew blood, tears that were never expressed in sound but in shivering and in silent withdrawal, but also by the smallest victories, a hand extended tentatively towards mine, a blink that timed itself to my voice, a small deliberate attempt to grasp a spoon rather than flail in panic. The station did not care for these victories. Its alarms screamed indifferently, the machines demanded compliance, and the overseers reminded me in every possible way that I was wasting resources, that my insistence on care was inefficient, foolish, even dangerous. Corporations sent emissaries to tempt me. They promised supplies, influence, or privileges if I would release the child, handing it over to profit and protocol. I considered these temptations for mere moments before dismissing them. Each glance into its eyes reminded me that life could not be measured in credits, nor loyalty in efficiency. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the child began to mirror me. It would adjust its posture to match mine, sit upright when I commanded no more than patience and calm, and even mimic expressions, tentative smiles that trembled on its lips, cautious tilts of its head when I spoke softly. Each gesture required patience that I had never before known I possessed. I learned to anticipate fear as if it were a language, to interpret the quiver of its eyelids, the tension in its shoulders, the faint rhythm of its breathing, all signaling its readiness to accept touch, sustenance, or instruction. The station around us remained relentless. Machines whirred and clanked with indifferent precision. Doors sealed and opened without regard for the lives they enclosed, and supervisors monitored every action, judging my care as wasteful and irresponsible. Yet in the quiet corners of the sleeping quarters, away from prying eyes, I discovered a fragile connection. Nights were long and silent, filled with small whispers and steady hands pressed to tiny shoulders, murmurs of encouragement, and the rhythm of breathing that eventually synchronized with my own. Sometimes it cried in silence, trembling in human embrace, haunted by things it could not name, tormented by memories and instincts that the alien species had implanted into it as deterrents to hope. I held it day after day, whispering truths I did not know how to fully explain, truths that only humans seem to understand instinctively. You are not alone, you are not worthless, and even broken, your life is meaningful. Months stretched into years, and the child's body slowly responded. Limbs strengthened, scars healed, muscles flexed where only weakness had existed. Yet more remarkable than the physical transformation was the evolution of its mind. It began to recognize patterns, understand instructions, and develop rudimentary problem-solving abilities. Where once there had been terror, there was now cautious curiosity. Where once there had been instinctive flinching, there was hesitancy tempered by choice. But every step forward was hard-won. There were regressions, moments of fear so intense that it curled into itself, refusing sustenance, shaking violently, eyes darting in panic at shadows that were long gone or noises that existed only in memory. Each setback demanded patience, observation, and a human capacity for empathy that allowed me to resist the impatience, the frustration, the very natural desire to abandon what the world had already deemed expendable. And always the alien society tested us in small but cruel ways. Officials reassigned labor, introduced new drills meant to measure compliance, and sometimes punished minor infractions in ways designed to break both of us. Machines faltered at precisely inopportune moments, compartments flooded with chemical residues, alarms screamed in ways meant to induce panic. Yet through it all, the child adapted, learning that not every threat necessitated flight, that some dangers could be met with calm, precise action, and that even in the absence of societal support, we could survive. I began teaching it not just survival, but trust, the most radical of lessons in a world that had programmed fear into every neuron. Step by step, I demonstrated that not all hands that touched were meant to harm, that not all voices demanded obedience, that patience could yield results where force and punishment could not. Over time, the child began to care for me as I cared for it. Small gestures, adjustments to my position, attention to my needs, protective movements that were subtle but unmistakable. The alien overseers, observing from afar, could not comprehend this. They calculated risk, utility, obedience, but they could not quantify connection, empathy, or shared intent. They labeled these developments irrelevant or incidental, blind to the profound change occurring before their eyes. Years passed, and the child matured. Its body became capable, limbs no longer awkward, muscles honed through careful practice, balance and coordination emerging not from obedience, but from repeated trial and gentle correction. Its mind sharpened, not merely to follow instructions, but to anticipate, to reason, to choose action guided by insight rather than fear. It began to rescue other neglected beings, small, timid aliens who had been overlooked or abused, coaxing them to trust, guiding them in the ways I had guided it, and slowly a quiet network of survivors formed in the margins of the station's mechanized society. There were moments of near disaster, fires that ignited in forgotten compartments, structural failures that crushed careless steps, machines malfunctioning in unpredictable patterns. But each time, the child acted with increasing autonomy, navigating danger with a careful calculation and awareness I had never dared hope it could achieve. And yet, the station's pressures never relented. Corporate emissaries persisted, whispering threats and promises alike. Officials issued warnings, recalculated policies, and attempted to isolate the child from influence that could not be quantified. Each temptation to hand it over, to retreat into compliance with the system, was met with the human stubbornness that refuses to sacrifice what is alive and true for comfort or safety.
The child learned resilience from repeated exposure to cruelty, patience from daily lessons that required months to teach a single gesture, empathy through modeling and gentle correction, and hope through the unbroken commitment of a human who refused to abandon it. It learned to read subtleties that no alien mind could have anticipated, the difference between urgency and panic, between hesitation and thought, between instinct and choice, and in the quiet, when the station slept and the metallic corridors echoed only with the distant hum of machinery, I saw it emerge as something entirely new, a being who could act decisively, yet with consideration, who could move through danger, yet maintain awareness, who could make choices not as an agent of command, but as a conscious, moral participant in the world around it. By the time it approached adolescence, there was a subtle awe in the eyes of those who had once labeled it defective. They watched as the child guided others, as it intervened in small crises, and as it demonstrated qualities that no system of punishment or reward could instill: courage, foresight, compassion, and patience measured not by protocol, but by need. I too marveled, though I had been its mentor, its protector, its constant in a world of indifference. I watched the tiny hand that once flinched at touch, now
Years had passed since I first claimed the trembling, twisted alien child from the indifferent hands of the station's overseers, and in that time the universe had done little to soften its edges. Machines still roared with cruel unpredictability, bureaucrats still measured lives in efficiency metrics, and the corridors still smelled of sterilized metal and machine oil, indifferent to the triumphs or failures that played out within them. Yet the child, no longer small, no longer fragile, had become something entirely unexpected, a being whose body was strong, whose mind was deliberate, and whose presence carried the quiet weight of experience tempered by years of patient guidance. It moved through the corridors with a precision that belied its early weakness, navigating machinery and hazards alike. Yet more remarkable than its physical capability was its ability to assess, to anticipate, to calculate risk in ways the alien operators could not have foreseen, because its calculations were guided not by utilitarian logic, but by empathy, understanding, and an intrinsic sense of responsibility that had been carefully nurtured through countless trials. In the years since, the station had continued its relentless operations, indifferent to the lives within, yet new threats emerged not from malice, but from the predictable chaos of malfunctioning technology. Structural failures in corridors, failing life support systems, containment breaches, and electrical fires that would have killed any unprepared occupant. I had prepared it for each of these scenarios, yet I could not act as a shield forever. The lessons I had taught, the patience I had enforced, were meant to become tools of survival for a being that would eventually have to act without me, to make choices where hesitation could mean death, to decide who to save and how. And so the child learned. Small incidents at first, a collapsed maintenance conduit here, a malfunctioning gravity field there, offered opportunities to test its comprehension and judgment. I watched from the shadows as it assessed danger, measured distances, predicted mechanical failures, and acted decisively. Sometimes it made mistakes, and those mistakes were painful, leaving burns, bruises, and near misses that reminded us both that survival demanded vigilance and courage. But each mistake was a lesson, each recovery an incremental triumph, each demonstration of awareness a proof that the values I had instilled, the stubborn hope, the patience, the insistence on care, were now intrinsic to the child, inseparable from its being. Outside, the alien society remained unrelenting in its utilitarian outlook. Overseers circulated reports labeling its successes as anomalies, dismissing its agency as random, inconsequential. Corporations sent envoys with proposals of reclamation, offering wealth, influence, and resources to hand it over, to transform its talents into commodities. I rejected every offer, not out of defiance alone, but because I had seen the spark in it, the unique life force that refused to bend to the cold metrics of the system.
It had become more than a being to be catalogued or measured. It was a testament to the power of care, patience, and moral choice in a universe that often ignored these qualities. Days blurred into months and then years, and the child's reputation began to precede it, not formally, not in bureaucratic or corporate documentation, but in whispered stories among the less powerful inhabitants of the station, beings who had been neglected, abused, or abandoned. It became known as a quiet force, a shadow that intervened in moments of danger, a presence that stabilized the frightened, guided the lost, and healed the overlooked. It rescued injured workers who had been left to die in maintenance tunnels, redirected power flows during electrical surges that could have crippled life support, and calmed panicked crews in moments of structural collapse. Each act was deliberate, measured, and voluntary. No orders compelled it, no protocol demanded its intervention. It chose, over and over, to act for others, embodying every lesson I had taught it about trust, empathy, and hope. Then came the day the station faced its greatest threat, a cascading series of failures that no single crew member, no human, no alien could have prevented alone. The primary reactor fluctuated dangerously, coolant systems ruptured under pressure, gravity fields stuttered and oscillated, and toxic gases filled lower decks. Alarms screamed incessantly, doors sealed unpredictably, machinery malfunctioned with a terrifying randomness, and the overseers froze, paralyzed by protocols that were useless in the face of unanticipated chaos. Panic spread faster than any physical hazard, and I felt the familiar tension coil in my chest, the instinctive fear that had accompanied every crisis since I first claimed the child. Yet this time I was not alone, nor were we without hope. The child, now fully mature, moved with a calm that I had never seen in any human or alien, assessing the environment, calculating routes, identifying threats, and making decisions in real time, not by orders, not by instruction, but through comprehension and moral judgment. It guided injured aliens to safety, recalibrated environmental controls using knowledge learned through trial of years, and intervened in life-threatening mechanical failures with precision born of experience. It coordinated other survivors with subtle gestures, nonverbal commands, and shared intuition, creating pockets of order amid chaos, turning despair into actionable steps for survival. I watched with awe as the being I had nurtured transformed what should have been catastrophe into salvation, and I realized with a profound clarity that this was the culmination of years of patience, empathy, and trust, not just mine, but the child's own. Throughout the ordeal, the aliens who had once scorned it were forced to witness, helplessly, as what they had deemed defective became the axis upon which the survival of the station turned. They attempted to intervene, to assert authority, to reclaim control, but every attempt was met with deliberate choices by the child, redirecting energy flows to save a flooded deck rather than obey a nonsensical order, stabilizing a failing gravity field rather than follow protocol, instructing terrified workers in methods of survival that no manual had prescribed. Each decision carried risk, and each risk was chosen consciously, with an understanding of consequence that no utilitarian society could have predicted or controlled. When the crisis finally subsided, the station scarred but intact, survivors counted and injuries treated, the child stood in the midst of it all, breathing steadily, eyes calm, posture deliberate, no longer trembling, no longer uncertain, entirely in control of its own agency. It had acted not because it had been told, not because it had been commanded, but because it understood the value of life in a way the aliens could not. I stepped forward, meeting its gaze, and in that moment an unspoken communication passed between us, a recognition that the years of training, the nights of whispered encouragement, the patience and unwavering care had all been validated in the most profound way possible. Officials and corporate representatives attempted to reclaim the child, framing their arguments in efficiency, profit, and potential output, but I refused. I had learned and the child had learned that value cannot be dictated by metrics, that life cannot be commodified without erasing its essence, and that the choices to protect, to heal, and to act for others cannot be measured in credits or productivity. Together, we walked through the station corridors, side by side, human and alien, a living testament to the quiet power of empathy, patience, and moral resolve. Whispers followed us, stories of the defective child who had saved countless lives, tales repeated in hushed voices in corridors where machinery hummed relentlessly. But beyond notoriety, there was a lesson embedded in every whisper. Humanity, with its stubborn hope, its capacity for care, and its refusal to accept disposability, could awaken the potential of even the most forsaken beings. In subsequent weeks, the child began to teach others, sharing lessons not of obedience, but of awareness, patience, and deliberate action. New generations of neglected or abandoned aliens followed its guidance, learning that survival is more than instinct, that strength is measured not just by force alone, but by resilience, compassion, and the courage to act for others. It healed, protected, and nurtured in ways that no alien logic could predict, setting a standard for life within the station that could not be quantified, only experienced. I watched, sometimes from a distance, sometimes close beside it, as it demonstrated over and over the principle I had lived by, that even in a universe that prizes utility over existence, even among beings who discard the weak, the patient, the compassionate, and the hopeful, can reshape the trajectory of lives and even entire civilizations. And as I observed its quiet triumphs, its deliberate choices, its acts of mercy and courage, I understood fully the magnitude of what we had achieved. A life once deemed defective had become a force of change, not because of power or design, but because it had been nurtured, valued, and taught the radical lesson that life, in its truest essence, is meaningful simply because it exists. The station remained flawed, the universe